Welcome to the next module. In this module, we will be studying about halogens and atmospheric chemistry, especially in the Arctic region. So, what are the different types of halogens and how we will do? A small overview is given here. The definition is elements including fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine are basically called as halogens, and the sources are, there are two sources. One is the natural source, which is from sea salt and volcanic activity. The second anthropogenic source is from CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and industrial emissions. And how do they affect or influence the Arctic? One is the ocean layer depletion, that we will be studying all the various reactions which are involved in it. Halogenated compounds break down ozone in the troposphere. Similarly, what is the impact on ice also we will see, which is the deposition on ice and influencing the melting rate. So these are all the two impact that halogens have on the Arctic. And how do we know? We have the statistical data on the ozone layer depletion. And how do we measure or find out all these things? We use tools and methods. Basically, the atmospheric monitoring and the laboratory analysis can be used to find out all the changes. So, apart from that, what are the environmental and climatic impact? Because why do we even need to study this particular halogens in the Arctic region? So, they have like greenhouse gases. They also have a very large impact. So the first impact on the climate is halogen reactions can alter the radiative balance of the atmosphere. So this is a major change, and they also influence the regional climate pattern. So that's the reason we have to understand how these are happening. And what are the ecological effect? The flora and fauna are basically affected. The ocean depletion and mercury deposition affect the Arctic ecosystems. For example, the damage to phytoplankton and which affect the entire food web happen. So these are all the ecological effect of halogens impact on the Arctic region. And human health, how it affects is basically increased UV radiation due to ozone depletion can lead to health issues such as skin cancer and cataract. So the three major halogens we will be focusing on. One is chlorine, bromine, and iodine. The common sources include, for chlorine, it is sea salt and anthropogenic emissions. What is the role it involved is, it is mainly involved in the ozone depletion, and it is highly reactive towards hydrocarbons. And with respect to bromine, sea salt and volcanoes are the major sources, and this is more effective than chlorine in the ozone depletion. It reacts mainly with ozone and only with the selected hydrocarbons such as aldehydes and dimethyl sulfide. And with respect to iodine, the main source is marine emissions and biological activity. They influence the atmospheric oxidation capacity, mainly reacts with ozone. So if you look at chlorine, the concentration during ozone depletion events, we will be studying about ozone layer separately in the coming modules. So we will just look at, was it ozone depleting event? That means ozone is reduced in that particular atmospheric region. That is a simple thing we can remember now. So derived chlorine concentrations are very low, and how do we know that is basically hydrocarbon concentration measurements and first order kinetic analysis helps in understanding what is the concentration that happens during the ocean depletion events. So we are going to connect. Chlorine is responsible for ozone depletion. So how do we connect that? We need to know how much gas, a particular gas is present and how it reacts with the ozone. So that is what we are going to find out. So how do we find out? We measure each and every gas concentration. So people study the concentration of chlorine, bromine, and other halogen gases as well as the other greenhouse gases and try to correlate at what particular concentration the ozone concentration keeps on changing, or ozone is getting degraded, or ozone is broken down. So this we can actually carry out, and that is how people do that. The concentration during ozone depletion events helps a cue or tells us that okay, chlorine is responsible for ozone depletion. And how do we detect it? We can see the chlorine dioxide detected up to 24 parts per trillion. So the formation of chlorine dioxide is one indication that ozone is getting destructed. So we will look at the chemical reaction that are happening. The chlorine oxide not unambiguously identified. So although chlorine dioxide is known, but chlorine oxide is not known. The sources and photochemical reactions are basically these are released in the saline surfaces, and many of the radicals are involved in the photochemical cycles during ODE. So we will be looking at the radical reactions mainly. So with respect to bromine, the global monitoring is polar orbiting satellites identified bromine oxide vertical columns in polar region. So this is one identification which tells that there is a reaction between bromine and oxygen. Ozone basically that leads to formation of bromine oxide. The large areas are covered by bromine oxide, that is called like clouds, and the importance of separating tropospheric and stratospheric contribution is a major challenge scientists are having. And how do we know that? We carry out the measurements and observations. So the high BRO mixing ratios in Amundsen Gulf had been found out. Similarly, diurnal variations observed with maxima and minima. And some of the scientists have detected bromine oxide with CIMS and DOAS. We will look at like what are these optical observation measurements we will be looking at in the later part. And correlation with wind speeds. And similarly in Antarctic region also people had observed that low bromine oxide columns and high near sea areas they had found out. So some of the field campaigns and the geographical distribution has been carried out with respect to iodine oxide. The springtime peak at 20 ppt at Halley, Antarctica, it was measured, and the bromine oxide measured simultaneously with the peak of 20 ppt. Ppt means parts per trillion. Similarly, the distribution, geographical distribution, if we look at IO means iodine oxide, widespread in coastal Antarctica, confirmed by satellite. So we are basically looking here at the polar regions, not very specifically with respect to Arctic alone. The limited detection of IO in the Arctic region, here people had found out only 3.4 ppt only. And why there is a difference between regions? The main thing is variation potentially due to sea ice thickness and ecosystem structure. Maybe we need to carry out various field measurements and laboratory studies to understand the difference between both the polar regions. And what is the mechanism of bromine release? One is the role of forest flowers, that is frost flowers. Initially thought to be the crucial for bromine activation. Then recent studies show that bromine oxide levels correlate with the sea ice exposure and not frost flowers. So this is a recent understanding. This frost flower surface area slightly larger than the sea ice. Their importance may be overstated. So due to that, because the surface area is higher, so people assume that okay, this is contributing more. There is unconfirmed hypothesis of frost flowers as sea salt aerosol sources. There is no scientific evidence to prove that. Similarly, blowing saline snow, salinity sources in the snow, and we can also carry out model simulation to find out what is the mechanism of bromine release. So the blowing saline snow means by using satellite measurements, we can show that bromine oxide clouds and surface ODs, ozone depletion events after snow events. So there is a correlation between these two things. So heterogeneous bromine activation on aerosol surface from blowing snow is possible. And similarly, salinity sources in the snow, the salt scavenged during snow settling and the salt enriched brine migration in snow and the flooding of snow covered sea ice as a potential mechanism. These are all the various ways by which the bromine can be released. And how the iodine can be released? Many models which suggest that inorganic precursors like iodine needed for high IO, that is iodine oxide levels, and some scientists had provided the evidence for iodine presence in the Antarctic marine boundary layer. So these are all some ways people are trying to understand and propose how the iodine oxide may be possible. But iodine oxide is actually measured. So people had identified up to 20 ppt in the Antarctic region, and the satellite observations indicate that widespread iodine active chemistry along the coast. The mechanism is still not completely understood. And what are the biological and environmental sources? There are two mechanisms which are proposed for the release of IO. One is biological production by marine algae diffusing through sea ice. The second one is large IO mixing ratios confined in snowpacks requiring high depositional fluxes. So halogen chemistry, especially in the polar ice sheets we are looking at, we are only looking at the region as a whole so far. Now we will be focusing on the polar ice. The recent studies have showed that there is bromine oxide at summits, especially Greenland, up to 5 ppt. And the potential source for bromine oxide may be bromide in the snowfall or transport of free troposphere or marine regions. Soluble bromine detected with mist in chambers. So these are all the ways by which scientists had found out that bromine exists in that Arctic region or in the polar ice sheets. Modeling and observation has been carried out by various scientists. They propose, one of the scientists had proposed reactive bromine presence to explain discrepancies of OH concentration, that is hydroxyl concentration. Thomas had coupled atmospheric snow photochemistry model simulating chemistry at the summit and observations of bromine and nitrogen oxides fluxes from liquid-like layers on snow grains. These are all the various studies people had used to predict how the changes are happening. And similarly, the mercury oxidation is also related to that. Observed oxidation of elemental mercury at summit during the same campaign tells that halogen chemistry is involved in the polar ice sheets also.